The photograph should not have existed. Kiera Thorne held the black and white print between latex-gloved fingers, studying the image that had been misfiled in the county archives for 37 years. The bus sat tilted against a cluster of desert rocks, its yellow paint bleached pale in the harsh sunshine, windows dark and empty as dead eyes. According to the evidence tag, this photograph had been taken 200 miles from Redstone National Park, where 23 children and 2 teachers had supposedly disappeared during a routine field trip in May. But every news report, every official statement, every family interview had insisted the bus vanished somewhere along the winding mountain roads leading to the park. Not here, in this desolate stretch of high desert that looked more like Mars than anywhere a school group would venture. Kiera set the photograph on her light table and reached for her magnifying glass. As the county's senior forensic archivist, she had seen thousands of crime scene photos, but something about this image sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the basement temperature of the archives building. The bus door hung open at an unnatural angle. Dark stains marked the dirt around the vehicle, stains that looked suspiciously like dried blood, even in the grainy black and white print. She flipped the photograph over. Written in faded blue ink, Bus Recovery Site, Officer Valdez, May. Below that, in different handwriting, confidential, do not release. The Meadowbrook Elementary field trip disappearance had been the defining tragedy of Kiera's childhood. She remembered the Amber Alerts, the massive search efforts, the candlelight vigils that stretched on for months. 25 people had simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind grieving families and a community that never quite recovered. The case had inspired her career choice. She became an archivist specifically to ensure that evidence never disappeared, that truth could always be found if someone looked hard enough. Yet here was evidence that contradicted everything she thought she knew about the case. Kiera photographed the image with her high-resolution camera, capturing every detail, every shadow, every suspicious stain. Then she turned to her computer and pulled up the original case files. After nearly 4 decades, most of the documents had been digitized and transferred to her department. She scrolled through incident reports, witness statements, search grid maps, all stamped with the familiar red close designation. According to Sheriff Marcus Wellstone's final report, dated September 1987, extensive searches of the Redstone National Park area had yielded no trace of the missing bus or its passengers. The case remained unsolved, classified as a presumed accident with bodies never recovered. Wellstone had retired shortly after, citing the emotional toll of the investigation. But Kiera had never seen any mention of a bus recovery site, no reference to Officer Valdez, no explanation for why this photograph had been buried in a filing cabinet marked miscellaneous vehicle incidents rather than properly catalogued with the Meadowbrook case files. She input the coordinates into a mapping program. The location appeared as a red pin in the middle of nowhere, a stretch of high desert approximately 50 miles southwest of the nearest highway, accessible only by rough dirt roads that would challenge even a 4-wheel drive vehicle. Definitely not somewhere a school bus would end up by accident. The basement archives felt suddenly oppressive, despite the fluorescent lighting and climate-controlled air. Kiera glanced around the endless rows of filing cabinets and storage boxes, each containing fragments of lives interrupted by crime, accident, or malice. She had always found comfort in this orderly preservation of evidence, but now the shadows between the shelves seemed to harbor secrets. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her supervisor. Meeting moved to 3 p.m. Can you pull the Morrison assault files? Kiera checked the time, 2:47 p.m. She would have to continue her investigation later. She carefully placed the photograph in a protective sleeve and locked it in her desk drawer, but not before making several high-quality scans. Something told her this image might disappear as easily as it had appeared. The Morrison files were located in Section G, 3 aisles over from her workstation. As she walked between the towering shelves, Kiera's mind kept returning to the mystery photograph. If the bus had been found in 1987, why had the families never been notified? Why were there no records of body recovery? No closure for the grieving parents and siblings who still held vigils every year on the anniversary. She was reaching for the Morrison box when she heard footsteps behind her, heavy boots on linoleum, moving slowly but deliberate. The archives building was supposedly empty, except for essential personnel, and she hadn't heard anyone enter. Kiera turned around. The aisle was empty, stretching back toward the main entrance in a perfectly straight line. No place for someone to hide. But the fluorescent light above her head flickered ominously, casting shifting shadows across the file boxes. Maybe she was letting the mysterious photograph get to her. She grabbed the Morrison files and headed back to her workstation. But the feeling of being watched persisted. As she passed the section containing cold case files, she noticed something that made her freeze. The Meadowbrook Elementary box was missing from its designated shelf. She checked the sign-out log at the front desk. No one had requested the files in over 2 years. The last entry was her own signature from a routine inventory check. Kiera's hands were trembling slightly as she dialed the building's security office. The phone rang 6 times before a bored voice answered. "Security. This is Ramon. This is Kiera in archive. Has anyone else been in the building today? Someone authorized. Let me check the logs." A pause. The sound of papers shuffling. "Nope. Just you and Dr. Hendricks from the DA's office. He left about 20 minutes ago." "Dr. Hendricks? What was he here for?" "Said he needed some old files for a case review. Had proper authorization from District Attorney Morrison." "Did you see what files he took?" "I don't monitor that stuff, Miss Thorne. That's your department." Kiera hung up and immediately called the DA's office. After being transferred twice, she reached someone who could confirm that Dr. Emil Hendricks was indeed a consulting forensic psychologist who occasionally reviewed cold cases for the district attorney. But when she asked about his visit to the archives, the response chilled her. "I'm sorry, but Dr. Hendricks is currently in Denver for a conference. He's been there all week." After ending the call, Kiera sat staring at her computer screen, her mind racing. Someone had impersonated Dr. Hendricks to gain access to the building. Someone who knew enough about the DA's office to forge authorization and who specifically wanted the Meadowbrook Elementary files. The same day she discovered a photograph that contradicted the official story. She opened her desk drawer and checked on the mysterious image. Still there. Still as disturbing as before. But now she noticed something she had missed earlier. In the background of the photograph, barely visible at the edge of the frame, was what looked like a second vehicle. A white van or truck, parked behind a cluster of rocks. Kiera enhanced the image digitally, pushing the contrast and brightness to their limits. The vehicle became slightly clearer, though still frustratingly indistinct. But she could make out what appeared to be figures standing near the van. At least 2 people, maybe 3. Too distant and blurry to identify, but definitely human. This wasn't just a photograph of an abandoned bus. This was documentation of an active scene, with multiple people present. People who, according to the official record, should not have existed. Her phone rang, jolting her from her analysis. The caller ID showed a local number she didn't recognize. Kiera Thorne. "Ms. Thorne, my name is Yasmin Delacroix. I work at the Riverside Memory Care Facility. We have a resident here, Elena Campos, who's been asking to speak with someone about the Meadowbrook school bus." Kiera's pulse quickened. "I'm not sure I understand." Elena was a teacher at Meadowbrook Elementary. She wasn't on the field trip, but she's been having some episodes lately where she talks about what really happened to that bus. "The doctors say it's just dementia." But her voice dropped to a whisper. "But she knows things, specific things that were never in the news report." "What kind of things?" "Ms. Campos keeps saying the children didn't disappear in the mountains. She says they were taken somewhere else. Somewhere in the desert. And she mentions a man named Valdez, who took pictures but was told to keep quiet." Kiera nearly dropped the phone. "Ms. Delacroix, I need to speak with Elena immediately. She's having a good day today, mentally speaking. But these episodes come and go. If you want to talk to her, you should come soon." The Riverside Memory Care Facility was a 15-minute drive from the archives building. Kiera left a note for her supervisor about following up on a potential lead, locked the mysterious photograph in her desk, and made copies of all the relevant files. As she drove through the late afternoon traffic, her mind churned with possibility. Elena Campos had been a teacher at Meadowbrook Elementary in If she had information about the field trip disappearance, why had she never come forward? And how did she know about Officer Valdez, whose name appeared nowhere in the official record. The memory care facility was a modern, cheerful building surrounded by landscaped gardens. Yasmin Delacroix met Kiera in the lobby, a petite woman with kind eyes and the weary expression of someone who spent her days caring for people whose minds were slowly slipping away. Elena's been here for 3 years, Yasmin explained as they walked down a corridor lined with family photographs and inspirational posters. Most of the time she's present and lucid, but when she starts talking about the field trip she becomes agitated. The doctors have been medicating her for it, but you think she's telling the truth? I think she's carrying a terrible secret, and I think it's been eating at her for decades. They stopped outside a door marked with cheerful sunflower decoration. Through the small window, Kiera could see an elderly woman sitting by the window staring out at the garden. Elena Campos was small and frail, with silver hair and hands that trembled slightly as she folded and refolded a tissue. Yasmin knocked gently and entered. "Elena, you have a visitor. This is Miss Thorne. She's here about the school bus." Elena's head snapped up, her eyes suddenly sharp and focused. "You found the pictures, didn't you? You found what Valdez took?" Kiera felt her breath catch. "How did you? I've been waiting 37 years for someone to find those pictures." Elena's voice was steady now, all trace of confusion gone. "They told us the children were lost in the mountains. They told us it was an accident, but I knew better." "What did you know, Elena?" Elena looked toward the door as if checking to make sure they weren't overheard. Then she leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I knew because I was supposed to be on that bus, but my daughter got sick that morning, so I stayed home. Margaret Holloway went instead. She was the substitute teacher." Elena's eyes filled with tears. 23 children, Margaret, and the bus driver, David Chen, all of them taken to that place in the desert. "What place?" Kiera asked gently. Elena reached into her bedside drawer and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She handed it to Kiera with shaking hand. It was a hand-drawn map, crude but detailed. It showed highways, dirt roads, and landmarks. In the center, marked with a red X, was a location labeled mining camp. Below the map, in Elena's careful handwriting, were coordinates that matched exactly the ones written on the back of the mysterious photograph. "How do you know about this place?" Kiera asked. "Because Margaret called me." Elena's voice broke. "The night before they disappeared, she called me at home. She was scared. Said she'd heard things about the field trip that didn't make sense. Changes to the route, different destination than what was announced to the parents." "What kind of changes?" "They weren't supposed to go to Redstone National Park that day. Margaret found out the real destination was some kind of private research facility in the desert. She tried to contact the principal, tried to cancel the trip, but..." Elena began to cry, her composure finally cracking after decades of silence. "But what?" Elena. "But she was told it was too late to change plans, that important people were involved, and the trip had to proceed as scheduled." Margaret was terrified, but she felt responsible for the children. She didn't want them to go without a teacher. Yasmin moved closer to Elena, offering comfort. "Take your time." Elena wiped her eyes and continued. "Margaret called me around midnight. She said if anything happened to them I should tell someone about the mining camp. She gave me the coordinates and made me promise to remember them." "Why didn't you go to the police?" Elena laughed bitterly. "I tried. I went to Sheriff Wellstone the day after they disappeared, and told him everything Margaret had said. He listened politely, wrote it all down, and assured me they would investigate every lead. And nothing. A week later, he called to tell me they had thoroughly searched the mining camp area, and found nothing. No sign of the bus, no evidence of any activity. He said Margaret must have been confused or misinformed. But you didn't believe him." "How could I?" Elena's voice gained strength. "Margaret Holloway was the most detail-oriented person I knew. She didn't get confused about directions or destinations. If she said the trip was going to the mining camp, then that's where it went." Kiera studied the hand-drawn map. The level of detail suggested Elena had visited the area herself. "Did you ever go there, to the mining camp?" Elena nodded slowly. "About 6 months after they disappeared, I drove out there by myself, just to see. I found the place easily enough. It's exactly where the coordinates indicated. But..." She paused, her hands beginning to shake again. but it didn't look like it had been abandoned for decades. There were fresh tire tracks, recent construction, and there were people there, men with guns who didn't want visitors. What did you do? I left. Fast. And I never went back. Elena gripped Kiera's arm with surprising strength. But I've been carrying this secret for 37 years, waiting for someone to care enough to find the truth. When Yasmin told me you were asking about the bus, I knew it was time. Elena reached into her drawer again and pulled out a small digital camera, obviously recent, not something she would have owned in My grandson gave me this last Christmas. I've been taking pictures of the maps and documents I've kept hidden all these years, just in case. She handed the camera to Kiera. The display showed dozens of photos, hand-drawn maps, newspaper clippings, notes written in various handwritings. But one image made Kiera's heart race. It was a photocopy of a document marked confidential at the top. The header read, Exodus Research Initiative, Phase 2 Implementation. Below that, a list of names and dates. At the bottom of the list, Meadowbrook Elementary Field Trip, May 14, 1987, 23 subjects plus 2 supervisors. Subjects, not students, not children, subjects. Elena, where did you get this? Margaret gave it to me the night before the trip. She'd found it in the principal's office and made a copy. She said it proved the field trip wasn't what it seemed. Kiera scrolled through the other images on the camera. More documents. More evidence of something far larger and more sinister than a simple school field trip gone wrong. One photograph showed a partial list of names under the heading Project Participants. She recognized several prominent local business leaders, a state senator, even a federal judge. Elena, this is incredible evidence. Why have you kept it hidden for so long? Because I was scared. Elena's voice became very small. 2 days after I went to the mining camp, my house was broken into. Nothing valuable was taken, but my office was ransacked. Someone was looking for something specific. A week later, I was contacted by a man who claimed to be from the FBI. He told me that Elena made air quotes with her fingers, spreading information about an ongoing federal investigation could be considered obstruction of justice. He said it would be better for everyone if I forgot about Margaret's phone call and focused on healing from the tragedy. Did you believe he was really FBI? At the time, yes. I was frightened and grieving and didn't know what else to do. But looking back, Elena shook her head. Real FBI agents don't usually threaten witnesses into silence. The room fell silent, except for the distant sounds of the memory care facility, muted conversations, the soft chime of call buttons, the whisper of nurses' shoes on polished floor. Kiera stared at the digital camera, her mind racing through the implications of what she'd discovered. Elena, I need you to understand something. If this evidence is real, if these documents are authentic, then we're talking about something much bigger than a field trip gone wrong. I know, Elena said quietly. I've known for 37 years. 25 people were murdered, and powerful people covered it up. The word hung in the air like a physical presence. Murder. Not disappeared, not presumed dead. Murder. Kiera looked at the elderly woman who had carried this terrible knowledge for nearly 4 decades. Watching the families of the victims hold vigils and conduct searches and cling to hope, all while knowing the truth was far worse than they imagined. Elena, I'm going to ask you to do something that might be dangerous. Anything. I need you to give me everything. All the documents, all the photographs, all the evidence you've collected, and I need you to let me investigate this properly. Elena smiled for the first time since Kiera had arrived. I've been waiting 37 years for someone to say that. As the sun set outside the memory care facility, Kiera found herself in possession of evidence that could potentially solve one of the most notorious cold cases in the county's history. But as she sat in her car in the parking lot, transferring Elena's files to her laptop, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. A white van had been parked across the street when she arrived. It was still there now, its windows too dark to see inside. As she prepared to drive away, the van's engine started. Kiera's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She pulled out of the parking lot and took a deliberately circuitous route home, making random turns and doubling back on her. The white van followed at a discreet distance, never getting too close but never losing sight of her car. By the time she reached her apartment building, Kiera's heart was pounding. She parked in the underground garage and took the elevator to her floor. But instead of going to her apartment, she continued to the roof access and peered down at the street. The white van was parked across from her building. 37 years after Elena Campos had been threatened into silence, it seemed the same people were still watching, still protecting their secret. But now they had a problem. Kiera Thorne was not a frightened teacher carrying a terrible burden alone. She was a trained forensic archivist, with access to law enforcement resources and the skills to preserve and analyze evidence. As she finally entered her apartment and spread Elena's documents across her dining room table, Kiera realized that her quiet career preserving the past had suddenly become a race to expose the truth before those who had hidden it for nearly 4 decades decided she knew too much. The photograph of the abandoned bus stared up at her from among the papers, evidence of a crime that powerful people had spent 37 years ensuring would never be solved. But evidence, Kiera knew, had a way of surviving even the most determined attempts to destroy it. And tomorrow she would begin the process of making the dead speak. Kiera woke at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of her apartment's fire alarm. She bolted upright in bed, immediately alert. No smoke, no smell of burning. The alarm chirped twice more, then fell silent. She grabbed her phone and checked the building's emergency app. No alerts, no evacuation notices, no reports of fire anywhere in the complex. Someone had tampered with her alarm. She slipped out of bed and moved carefully to her living room window. The white van was gone, but a dark sedan had taken its place across the street. As she watched, a figure in the driver's seat raised what looked like binoculars to the window of her apartment. Kiera's blood turned to ice. She backed away from the window and quickly gathered Elena's documents, her laptop and the mysterious photograph. If they were willing to break into her building to plant surveillance devices, they wouldn't hesitate to search her apartment. 20 minutes later, she was sitting in the 24-hour diner downtown, surrounded by insomniacs, shift workers, and the occasionally homeless person seeking shelter. She had chosen a booth with clear sightlines to both entrances and her car in the parking lot. The documents were secured in a waterproof messenger bag that never left her side. As she sipped bitter coffee and tried to process the night's events, Kiera's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You're asking the wrong questions. Meet me at Riverside Cemetery, Section C. Sunrise. Come alone." A friend of Margaret Holloway. Margaret Holloway, the substitute teacher who had died on the bus. Kiera stared at the message, her hands trembling slightly. Every instinct told her this was a trap, but the reference to Margaret suggested someone with genuine knowledge of the case. And after 37 years of silence, perhaps other people were finally ready to speak. She spent the remaining hours until dawn researching the Exodus Research Initiative. The name appeared in no official records, no corporate filings, no academic paper, but deep in the archived pages of a long-defunct conspiracy theory website, she found a brief mention. Rumors of government-funded psychological experiments conducted on unwilling subjects during the 1980s, allegedly connected to mind control research and cult deprogramming technique. The website had been taken down in 1999, but Kiera's archival training had taught her that nothing truly disappeared from the internet. She found cached versions and mirror sites, piecing together fragments of information that painted a disturbing picture. According to these unverified sources, the Exodus Research Initiative had been a joint venture between private contractors and federal agencies, designed to study the effects of isolation, fear, and psychological manipulation on both children and adults. The research had allegedly been conducted at remote facilities throughout the American Southwest, using subjects who would not be missed or whose disappearances could be explained away. Runaway children, homeless individuals, and occasionally, Kiera realized with growing horror, entire groups who could be made to vanish under the cover of natural disasters or accidents, like a school bus that supposedly crashed in a remote mountain area where bodies would never be recovered. Riverside Cemetery was shrouded in morning mist when Kiera arrived at sunrise. Section C occupied a hillside overlooking the river, filled with weathered headstones dating back to the early 1900s. She parked near the main gate and walked slowly among the graves, alert for any sign of movement. She found him sitting on a stone bench near a small mausoleum, a man in his 70s with silver hair and the ramrod posture of someone with military training. He wore a simple black coat and held a worn photograph in his hands. "Officer Valdez, I presume?" He looked up with eyes that had seen too much. "Retired Detective Sergeant Luis Valdez, Moab County Sheriff's Department. And you're the archivist who found my photograph?" Kiera sat down beside him, keeping her messenger bag close. Why did you keep quiet for 37 years? Because I valued my life more than the truth. Valdez's voice carried deep regret. And because I was a coward who convinced himself that speaking out would only result in more deaths. He handed her the photograph he'd been holding. It showed a young woman in her 30s with kind eyes and a warm smile, wearing a Meadowbrook Elementary t-shirt. Margaret Holloway. I interviewed her parents after the disappearance and they gave me this picture. Told me how excited she was about the field trip, how she loved working with children. Valdez stood and began walking among the headstones. Kiera followed. I was a 28-year-old deputy in 1987, assigned to routine patrol in the county's remote area. On May 15th, I received a radio call about a suspicious vehicle in the desert. Coordinates matching the ones you found on my photograph. What did you find there? Hell. Valdez stopped walking and turned to face her. I found a yellow school bus with bullet holes in the windows and blood spatter on the seats. I found evidence of a struggle, personal belongings scattered in the dirt, and tire tracks indicating multiple vehicles had been at the scene. And the children? Gone. All of them, but not missing. There were clear signs of organized transport, boot prints in formation, areas where groups had been lined up, drag marks leading to where other vehicles had been parked. Kiera felt sick. You documented everything. I took over 60 photographs, collected physical evidence, made detailed notes of the scene. I followed proper protocol for a major crime scene, and called for backup and the crime scene unit. But none of that evidence made it into the official file. Because Sheriff Wellstone arrived before the backup did, he took one look at the scene, confiscated my camera, and told me this was now a federal matter under his direct supervision. Valdez resumed walking, leading Kiera deeper into the cemetery. Wellstone told me the bus had been moved to this location after the actual incident which had occurred in the mountains as reported. He said the federal government was using the scene for training exercises, and that my photographs could compromise national security. Did you believe? I wanted to. Valdez's voice became quiet. I was young, ambitious, and Wellstone was a respected sheriff with 30 years of experience. But something felt wrong about the whole situation. What changed your mind? 2 weeks later, I was approached by a man claiming to be from the Department of Justice. He offered me a transfer to a sheriff's department in Arizona, a significant salary increase and a recommendation for detective training. In exchange for your silence, in exchange for my discretion regarding ongoing federal operations, he made it clear that discussing the bus incident with anyone would be considered a breach of national security, and could result in prosecution under the Espionage Act. Kiera stopped walking. Detective Valdez, if what you're telling me is true, then 25 people were murdered and you helped cover it up. Valdez turned to face her, his eyes filled with 3 decades of guilt and regret. Miss Thorne, I've been living with that knowledge every day for 37 years. I took their money, moved to Arizona, and spent my career trying to make amends by solving other cases, helping other victims. But I never forgot those children. Then why are you talking to me now? Because Elena Campos contacted me last week. She told me someone had finally found my photograph, and she gave me your name. Valdez reached into his coat and pulled out a thick manila envelope. And because I'm 73 years old, with stage 4 lung cancer, I don't have much time left to make things right. He handed her the envelope. Inside, Kiera found copies of the original police reports, evidence logs, and most importantly, contact information for 2 other people who had been involved in the cover-up. The first name made her heart skip. Dr. Emilio Santos, former Moab County coroner, now retired and living in Santa Fe. According to Valdez's notes, Santos had been pressured to sign death certificates for the missing children and teachers without ever examining bodies. The second name was more troubling. Judge Patricia Morrison, currently serving on the State Superior Court. The same Morrison whose assault files Kiera had been asked to retrieve the day before. Judge Morrison was a deputy district attorney in 1987, Valdez explained. She was brought in to handle the legal aspects of the federal takeover. Very ambitious young prosecutor who understood which cases to pursue and which cases to quietly close. Kiera studied the documents, her mind racing through the implications. Dr. Santos might be willing to talk, especially if he had been carrying guilt similar to Valdez's. But Judge Morrison represented a different kind of problem, someone who had benefited from the cover-up, and now held significant power. There's something else, Valdez said. In 2003, I was contacted by a private investigator named Tobias Crane. He was researching disappearances throughout the Southwest during the 1980s and had identified a pattern of missing groups that matched the Exodus Research Initiative profile. What happened to his investigation? Crane died in a car accident 3 weeks after he contacted me. Single vehicle crash on a remote highway. No witnesses. Very convenient timing. Kiera felt the familiar chill of being watched. She glanced around the cemetery but saw no signs of surveillance. Detective, do you know if the research facility is still active? Valdez nodded grimly. According to Crane's research, the mining camp was just one of several locations. The operation moved to different sites every few years, always staying ahead of potential investigations. But the core organization remained intact. Have there been other disappearances? More recent ones? Crane believed so. His research suggested the program continued into the 1990s. Possibly beyond. Different methods, different cover stories, but the same basic approach, taking groups of people who could disappear without triggering major investigation. As they walked back toward the cemetery entrance, Valdez stopped at a small grave marker near the path. The headstone read, David Chin, 1956-1987, beloved father and educator. The bus driver, Kiera said softly. His wife insisted on a burial service even though no body was ever recovered. She visits here every week, still hoping for answers. Valdez knelt and placed a small stone on the grave marker, a Jewish tradition of remembrance that seemed fitting for all the victims. Ms. Thorne, I need you to understand something. The people behind this cover-up have had 37 years to consolidate power and eliminate threats. If you continue this investigation, you're putting yourself in tremendous danger. But if I don't continue, the victims will never get justice. Valdez stood and looked directly into her eye. Justice may not be possible, but truth might be achievable. And sometimes that has to be enough. After leaving the cemetery, Kiera drove directly to Santa Fe, a 3-hour journey that gave her time to process everything Valdez had revealed. She made the trip in a rental car, having left her personal vehicle in a public parking garage with instructions for a friend to move it periodically. If she was being tracked through her license plate, this might buy her some time. Emilio Santos lived in a modest adobe house in an older neighborhood near the plaza. He answered the door himself. A small, elderly man with intelligent eyes and trembling hands that suggested Parkinson's disease. Dr. Santos, my name is Kiera Thorne. I'm investigating the Meadowbrook Elementary disappearance. Detective Valdez gave me your name. Santos studied her for a long moment, then stepped aside to let her enter. His living room was filled with medical textbooks, family photographs, and the accumulated treasures of a long life. But Kiera noticed something else. Several suitcases stacked near the front door. Are you going somewhere, Dr. Santos? He gestured for her to sit in a comfortable chair near the fireplace. Ms. Thorne, I've been expecting someone like you for 37 years. When Valdez called to tell me you had found the photograph, I knew it was time to leave. Leave? My wife died 6 months ago. My children live in other states. There's nothing keeping me here anymore, and I'm too old to keep running from the truth. Santos moved slowly to a desk in the corner and retrieved a thick folder. I never destroyed the original autopsy protocols even though I was ordered to. I couldn't bring myself to erase the last evidence of what really happened to those children. He handed her the folder. Inside were detailed medical reports, photographs, and documentation that made Kiera's stomach clench with horror. 25 bodies had been recovered from the mining campsite. All showed signs of medical experimentation injection sites, surgical scars, evidence of psychological trauma so severe it had manifested in physical symptoms. Several of the children had been subjected to experimental drugs that had caused organ failure. Others showed signs of extreme stress and malnutrition. Dr. Santos, this is evidence of torture and murder. Why didn't you report it? Because I was told the deaths were the result of a tragic accident during a legitimate medical research program. Santos's voice was barely above a whisper. I was shown federal authorization documents, told that the families could never know the details because it would compromise national security. But you knew better. I suspected. The evidence was too systematic, too deliberate to be accidental. But I was a small-town coroner, dealing with what appeared to be federal agencies. I felt powerless. Santos walked to the window and looked out at his garden. 6 months after I signed the death certificates, my practice was audited by the state medical board. No violations were found, but the message was clear. I was being watched. A year later, I received a significant research grant from a federal health agency, enough money to modernize my entire facility. Kiera studied the medical reports, noting the professional thoroughness of Santos's documentation despite the official cover-up. Dr. Santos, these reports describe a methodical program of human experimentation. This wasn't research. It was systematic abuse and murder. Santos turned back to her, tears in his eyes, and I've been living with that knowledge every day since. When my wife was dying, she asked me if I had any regrets about my career. I wanted to tell her about those children, but I couldn't bear the thought of her dying with that knowledge. The medical evidence painted a picture even more horrific than Kiera had imagined. The Exodus Research Initiative hadn't simply kidnapped and killed the Meadowbrook field trip group. They had used them as test subjects in experiments that violated every principle of medical ethics and human dignity. Dr. Santos, do you know who was running the research program? The federal contact was a man named Dr. Harrison Blackwood. He claimed to be with the Centers for Disease Control, but his credentials never quite checked out. Very sophisticated operation, very well funded. Is Blackwood still alive? As far as I know. Santos handed her another document. I've been tracking him over the years, just to keep tabs on potential threats. He's currently listed as a consulting researcher with Meridian Biological Systems, a private contractor that does work for various government agencies. Kiera felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. A private research company would have the resources and connections to conduct illegal experiments, while maintaining plausible deniability for government sponsors. Where is Meridian Biological Systems located? They have facilities throughout the Southwest, but their main research campus is about 60 miles from here, in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Santos walked to his desk and pulled out a roadmap marked with red ink. I've driven past their facility several times over the years. Very secure, very isolated. But here's the interesting part. They're still actively recruiting test subjects. What do you mean? Santos pointed to a newspaper clipping taped to the map. Every few months, they place advertisements in local papers offering paid participation in medical study. They target homeless individuals, undocumented immigrants, people who won't be missed if something goes wrong. Kiera stared at the advertisement. Meridian Biological Systems was still operating, still conducting research on unwilling or uninformed subjects. 37 years after the Meadowbrook massacre, Dr. Santos, would you be willing to testify about what you know, if it means those children finally get justice? Yes, but Ms. Thorne, you need to understand, these people have killed to protect their secrets before. They won't hesitate to do it again. As Kiera prepared to leave Santa Fe with Dr. Santos's evidence, she couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Too many people now knew she was investigating the case. Elena Campos at the memory care facility, Detective Valdez at the cemetery, Dr. Santos here in Santa Fe. If the same organization that had covered up the original murders was still active, they would soon realize that their carefully maintained silence was beginning to crack. Her phone buzzed with another text from an unknown number. Stop digging or join the children in the desert. This time, the threat was unambiguous. Kiera looked at the suitcases by Dr. Santos's door and realized he had the right idea. She couldn't go home. She couldn't return to her normal life. The investigation had reached a point where the only choice was to push forward, or spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. Dr. Santos, I have a proposition for you. I'm listening. Instead of running away separately, why don't we finish this together? You have the medical evidence. I have the crime scene photographs and Elena's documents. Together, we might have enough proof to expose the truth. Santos was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications. Miss Thorne, I'm 78 years old. With Parkinson's disease, I don't have much to lose anymore. But you're young, with a full life ahead of you. Are you certain you want to risk everything for people who died nearly 4 decades ago? Kiera thought about the children's faces and the missing person reports. About Margaret Holloway's terrified phone call to Elena Campos. About David Chen's wife visiting his empty grave every week. Santos, I became an archivist because I believe the dead deserve to have their stories preserved. These children have been silent for 37 years. It's time for them to speak. As they loaded Dr. Santos's evidence into her rental car, Kiera made a decision that would irrevocably change the course of her life. Instead of taking the safest route and turning everything over to federal authorities who might or might not be trustworthy, she was going to visit the Meridian Biological Systems facility herself. If the Exodus Research Initiative was still active after all these years, then the Meadowbrook children were not the only victims. There might be others. People currently being held, currently being experimented on, currently waiting for rescue. And if Kiera Thorne had learned anything from 37 years of preserved evidence, it was that sometimes the only way to save the living was to give voice to the dead. As they drove toward the mountains, following Dr. Santos's hand-marked map toward the Meridian facility, Kiera's phone rang one final time. The caller ID showed Elena Campos's number at the memory care facility. Miss Thorne, this is Yasmin Delacroix. I'm calling about Elena. What's wrong? She's missing. Her room was empty this morning and none of the staff saw her leave. Her personal belongings are gone, but she left something for you. What? A note. It says they found me but the children are still calling. Room 47, basement level, northwest corner. Tell Kiera the evidence is in the foundation. The line went dead. Kiera stared at her phone, understanding with crystalline clarity that Elena Campos had just sacrificed herself to provide one final clue. Room 47, basement level, northwest corner. Coordinates within a building that could only be the Meridian Biological Systems facility. Dr. Santos, looking pale but determined, reached over and squeezed her hand. Miss Thorne, I think we're about to discover that this story is far from over. As their car climbed into the mountains toward a facility that had been conducting illegal human experiments for nearly 4 decades, Kiera realized that the Meadowbrook Elementary field trip disappearance had been just the beginning of something much larger and more terrible than anyone had imagined. The children who had died in 1987 were finally going to get their justice. But first Kiera and Dr. Santos would have to survive long enough rescue the victims who were still alive. The Meridian Biological Systems facility emerged from the mountain mist like something from a nightmare. Kiera parked the rental car behind a cluster of pine trees, approximately half a mile from the main gate. Through binoculars borrowed from Dr. Santos, she could see a sprawling complex of modern buildings surrounded by high fences topped with razor wire. Security cameras swept the perimeter in regular patterns, and armed guards patrolled the grounds with military precision. This doesn't look like a medical research facility, Dr. Santos observed, his voice tight with anxiety. This looks like a prison. The main building was a stark concrete structure rising 4 stories above ground, with what appeared to be additional levels built into the mountainside. Smaller outbuildings housed what looked like laboratories, administrative offices and residential quarters. But it was the basement level that held Kiera's attention, specifically the northwest corner where Elena had indicated room 40. According to Elena's final message, evidence was hidden in the foundation, evidence that could finally expose the full scope of the Exodus Research Initiative's crime. As they studied the facility layout, Kiera's phone vibrated with an encrypted message from an unknown sender. Perimeter breach detected. 2 individuals east approach. Initiating lockdown protocols. Her blood turned to ice. They had been spotted. Dr. Santos, we need to move. Now. Before he could respond, the sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the forest. 2 black SUVs were racing up the mountain road toward their position, kicking up clouds of dust and moving with the urgency of a tactical response team. Kiera grabbed the evidence bags and her laptop. They ran deeper into the forest, following a rough trail that led toward the facility's rear perimeter. Behind them she could hear car doors slamming and voices shouting coordinates. As they stumbled through the undergrowth, Dr. Santos's breathing became labored. His Parkinson's symptoms made the uneven terrain treacherous. But he pressed on with the determination of someone who had carried guilt for 37 years, and finally had a chance for redemption. They reached a drainage culvert that passed under the facility's perimeter fence. The concrete tunnel was barely large enough for a person to crawl through, and it reeked of stagnant water and industrial chemicals. Dr. Santos, I don't think you can make it through there. He gripped her arm with surprising strength. Miss Thorne, I've been running from this responsibility my entire adult life. I'm not stopping now. The crawl through the drainage tunnel took 20 minutes that felt like hours. When they finally emerged on the facility side of the fence, they were soaked, muddy, and exhausted, but they were inside the perimeter of the most secure research installation in the region. Kiera consulted Elena's hand-drawn map, orienting herself toward the northwest corner of the main building. According to the layout, Room 47 would be accessible through a service entrance near the facility's power distribution center. As they moved carefully between buildings, staying in the shadows and avoiding the security camera sweeps, Kiera noticed something that made her heart race. A yellow school bus parked behind one of the outbuildings, partially hidden under a camouflage tarp. It was old, weather-beaten, and bore the faded words Meadowbrook Elementary on its side. 37 years later, the bus was still here. Dr. Santos stared at the vehicle with tears in his eyes. All this time they kept it, like a trophy or evidence they couldn't risk disposing of. Kiera said grimly, that bus contains DNA evidence, fingerprints, maybe even personal belongings from the victims. They photographed the bus from multiple angles, documenting its location and condition. But as Kiera was taking close-up shots of the license plate, she heard a sound that made her freeze. Children's voices, singing. The sound was coming from the main building, drifting up from basement-level window. It was a children's choir, their voices eerily harmonious as they sang what sounded like a lullaby. But there was something wrong with the melody, something discordant and unsettling that made Kiera's skin crawl. Those aren't children, Dr. Santos whispered, his face pale with recognition. Those are adults who've been psychologically regressed through pharmaceutical conditioning and extreme psychological trauma. What do you mean? One of the research protocols I reviewed in 1987 involved inducing childlike psychological states in adult subjects. The goal was to study learned helplessness and compliance conditioning. The researchers had developed techniques to mentally reduce adults to the emotional and cognitive level of children. Kiera felt sick. They're still doing it. After all these years, they're still experimenting on people. The service entrance to the basement level was secured with an electronic lock, but Dr. Santos surprised her by producing a keycard from his wallet. I kept Dr. Blackwood's access card from 1987, he explained. Most organizations never update their security systems as thoroughly as they should. The card worked. The door clicked open, revealing a dimly lit corridor that stretched into the depths of the facility. The singing was louder now, accompanied by other sounds, mechanical humming, the beep of medical equipment, and occasionally soft crying. Room 47 was at the end of the corridor, just as Elena had indicated, but as they approached, Kiera realized they were not alone in the basement. Footsteps echoed from an adjacent hallway, and she could hear voices discussing research protocols and subject compliance rate. They ducked into an empty room, apparently a supply closet filled with medical equipment and pharmaceutical supply. Through the partially open door, Kiera watched as several people in white lab coats walked past, discussing their current projects with the casual detachment of people who had long ago stopped seeing their subjects as human beings. The neural pathway modification is showing promising results, one of them was saying. Subject 23 has achieved complete memory suppression of her previous identity. Excellent. Another voice replied. Dr. Blackwood will be pleased. How are the new arrivals adapting to the conditioning protocol? 3 of the 5 are responding well. The elderly woman is proving more resistant, but we're adjusting her medication dosage. Kiera's heart stopped. Elena. They were talking about Elena Campos. After the researchers passed,
She and Dr. Santos continued toward room. The door was unlocked, and inside they found what appeared to be Elena's final gift to the investigation, a small space that had been converted into a makeshift archive. The room contained filing cabinets, computers and walls covered with photographs, documents and timeline charts. But it was clear this wasn't a facility archive. This was Elena's private investigation, conducted during whatever time she had been held captive here. On the main desk, Kiera found a handwritten note in Elena's careful script. If you're reading this, then my final deception worked. I didn't disappear. I infiltrated. For 3 weeks I've been documenting everything. The evidence you need is in the foundation. Literally, behind the loose stone. Second row from the floor. West wall. Kiera found the indicated stone and pried it loose. Behind it was a waterproof container holding digital storage devices, documents and a detailed map of the facility's current operation. But the most shocking discovery was a list of names. Not just the Meadowbrook victims from 1987, but hundreds of people who had disappeared over the past 37 years. Homeless individuals, undocumented immigrants, runaway teenagers, elderly people with dementia from care facilities. All had been systematically kidnapped and brought to various Exodus Research Initiative sites for human experimentation. The scope of the operation was staggering. According to Elena's documentation, the program had expanded far beyond its original parameters, becoming a self-sustaining enterprise that supplied test subjects to multiple research facilities throughout the country. Dr. Santos examined the medical protocols Elena had copied. Ms. Thorne, this is documentation of crimes against humanity. They've been conducting systematic torture disguised as research for nearly 4 decades. As Kiera photographed Elena's evidence, she heard new sounds from elsewhere in the basement. Alarms, running footsteps, and voices raised in urgency. Their infiltration had been discovered. But she also heard something else. Elena's voice, weak but defiant, coming from somewhere nearby. I told you I don't know how they found the facility. Elena was saying, I'm just a confused old woman with dementia. Subject 47 has been uncooperative since arrival. A man's voice replied. Dr. Blackwood has authorized enhanced conditioning protocols. Enhanced conditioning. Dr. Santos whispered. Torture. They had to find Elena before the researchers could inflict further harm. But as they prepared to leave room 47, the door burst open, and 3 armed security guards entered, weapons drawn. Step away from the evidence. One of them commanded. Dr. Blackwood wants to see you immediately. Harrison Blackwood's office occupied the top floor of the main building, with panoramic windows overlooking the mountain valley. He was younger than Kiera had expected, perhaps 60 years old, with silver hair and the polished appearance of someone accustomed to wielding authority. But his eyes held the cold detachment of a predator. Ms. Thorne, Dr. Santos, he said without looking up from his desk, you've caused quite a disruption to our research schedule. The walls of his office were lined with awards, certificates and photographs showing Blackwood with various government officials and military leaders. But what caught Kiera's attention were the framed newspaper clippings. Reports of missing person cases spanning 4 decades, all bearing the subtle signatures of Exodus Research Initiative operations. I must admit, I'm impressed by your investigative skills, Blackwood continued. It's taken 37 years for anyone to piece together even a fraction of our operation. Most impressive. You're admitting to the kidnapping and murder of the Meadowbrook children? Kiera asked. Blackwood finally looked up, his expression one of mild amusement. Ms. Thorne, you're thinking too small. The Meadowbrook field trip was one of our earliest successes, but it was hardly unique. We've conducted similar operations dozens of times over the year. He stood and moved to a large map on the wall, marked with red pins indicating locations throughout the Southwest. Each pin represents a successful acquisition event: school groups, nursing home outings, homeless encampments, refugee families. We've refined our techniques considerably since now. Dr. Santos spoke for the first time since entering the office. You're describing systematic genocide. Blackwood laughed. Dr. Santos, you're being dramatic. We're conducting vital research that benefits society as a whole. Our subjects provide valuable data that helps us understand human psychology, develop new pharmaceuticals, and improve methods of social control. Social control? The modern world requires effective methods of managing populations, dealing with dissent and maintaining order. Our research contributes to those goals. Kiera realized she was looking at someone who genuinely believed his own justifications. Blackwood wasn't just a criminal. He was an ideologue who had convinced himself that systematic torture and murder were necessary for the greater good. Blackwood. Where is Elena Campos? Subject 47. She's currently undergoing cognitive restructuring in our behavioral modification unit. Fascinating case, actually. Elderly subject with surprising resistance to standard conditioning protocols. She's not a subject, she's a human being. Blackwood returned to his desk and opened a thick file. Miss Thorne, I'm going to make you an offer. Join our research team. Your skills as an archivist could be valuable in documenting our work. In exchange, I'll arrange for comfortable accommodations and ensure your safety. And if I refuse, then you'll become research subjects yourselves. We have ongoing studies examining investigative psychology, obsessive behavior patterns, and the effects of isolation on forensic professionals. Before Kiera could respond, the office door burst open and Elena Campos entered, supported by 2 security guards but walking under her own power. Her hair was disheveled and she bore signs of recent medical procedures, but her eyes were clear and determined. Elena. Kiera started toward her, but the guards raised their weapons. Hello, dear, Elena said calmly. I see you found my archive. Blackwood's composure cracked slightly. Subject 47 should be undergoing treatment in the conditioning unit. Elena smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had just executed a carefully planned deception. I'm afraid your enhanced conditioning protocols were less effective than you believed. Dr. Blackwood, you see, I've been documenting everything during my time here, including the locations of your current research subjects. She reached into her hospital gown and produced a small digital recorder. I've been recording conversations, mapping facility layouts and identifying escape routes. Everything you need to shut down this operation permanently.
Blackwood's face turned red with rage. Impossible. You've been under constant supervision and medication. Elena's smile widened. Doctor, I taught elementary school for 42 years. Do you really think I haven't learned how to hide things from authority figures and pretend to swallow pills? As if on cue, the facility's alarm system activated, filling the air with piercing sirens. Through the office windows, Kiera could see helicopters approaching from multiple directions, their searchlights cutting through the mountain mist. FBI, federal agents, came the amplified voice from the helicopters. This facility is surrounded. Elena looked directly at Dr. Blackwood. I've been in contact with federal authorities since my second day here. Everything I recorded has been transmitted to the FBI, the Department of Justice, and several major news organizations. How? Blackwood demanded. Elena pulled out what appeared to be a hearing aid, satellite communication device, courtesy of some very helpful people who've been investigating the Exodus Research Initiative for years. It seems you're not as invisible as you believed. The office door burst open again, this time admitting a team of armed federal agents in tactical gear. Federal agents. Hands where we can see them. As Dr. Blackwood and his security team were arrested, Kiera realized that Elena Campos had orchestrated the most sophisticated undercover operation she had ever witnessed. The confused elderly woman with dementia had been entirely fictional, a performance designed to infiltrate the facility and gather evidence from the inside. Agent Sarah Mendoza, FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit. The lead agent introduced herself. Miss Thorne. Dr. Santos. Ms. Campos. We've been tracking this organization for 3 years. Your evidence finally gave us what we needed for warrants and arrests. Over the following hours, as federal agents secured the facility and began documenting evidence, Kiera learned the full scope of what they had uncovered. The Meridian facility housed 47 current research subjects, ranging in age from teenagers to elderly adults. All showed signs of systematic abuse, but all were alive and could be rescued. The Exodus Research Initiative had operated for 38 years under various names and organizational structures, conducting illegal human experimentation while maintaining contracts with both government agencies and private corporations. The research had produced pharmaceutical products, psychological manipulation techniques, and behavioral control methods that had been sold to military, intelligence, and law enforcement organizations worldwide. But most importantly, Elena's infiltration had captured detailed confessions from Dr. Blackwood and his staff, providing irrefutable evidence of their crimes spanning 4 decades. Agent Mendoza led Kiera to a conference room where she was reunited with Elena, who looked exhausted, but triumphant. "Elena, I can't believe what you did. You risked everything." Elena took her hand with fingers that no longer trembled. "Kiera, I've been planning this for 3 years. Ever since I started having those supposed dementia episodes, I knew eventually someone would investigate the Meadowbrook case again, and I wanted to be ready." "You faked dementia for 3 years." "Not entirely. I do have early-stage cognitive changes, but nothing like what I pretended. I used the memory care facility as cover while I researched the current structure of the Exodus Research Initiative, and made contact with federal investigators." Kiera shook her head in amazement. "Elena, you're the most brilliant person I've ever met. I'm a teacher who lost 23 children to monsters." Elena's voice became serious. "Everything I've done for the past 37 years has been focused on getting those children just." Through the conference room windows they could see investigators loading evidence from the facility into federal vehicles. Among the items being carefully cataloged was the yellow Meadowbrook Elementary bus, finally being treated as the crime scene it had always. Agent Mendoza rejoined them with an update. "Miss Thorne, we've confirmed the identities of all 47 current victims. Thanks to your documentation and Miss Campos's recordings, we expect to file charges that could result in life sentences for everyone involved in the operation." "What about the victims' families? The Meadowbrook families who've been waiting 37 years for answers?" Agent Mendoza smiled. "FBI victim specialists are already making notifications. The families will finally know what happened to their children, and they'll see their killers brought to justice." As the sun set over the mountains, Kiera found herself standing with Doc Santos and Elena on the facility's main entrance steps, watching as the last of the evidence was loaded for transport. Federal agents continued to emerge from the buildings, each carrying boxes of documents, computer equipment, and physical evidence that would ensure the Exodus Research Initiative could never operate again. Santos, his hands steadier than they had been in years, looked toward the yellow school bus, now surrounded by crime scene technicians. 37 years, he said quietly. Those children waited 37 years for someone to speak for them. Elena placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "David, they weren't waiting alone. We were carrying their voices all this time." Agent Mendoza approached with final paperwork for them to sign. "Miss Thorne, I have a question for you. Given your experience with this case, and your investigative skills, would you be interested in consulting with the FBI on similar cold cases?" Kiera looked at the evidence boxes, thinking about all the other victims whose cases might never be solved without someone willing to dig deeper, to ask uncomfortable questions, to preserve evidence that others wanted to disappear. "Agent Mendoza, I think that's exactly what I'm meant to do." 6 months later, Kiera Thorne stood before a congressional hearing room packed with media, family members, and federal investigators. As the FBI's new senior forensic archivist for cold case investigations, she was presenting the final report on the Exodus Research Initiative prosecution. In total, 43 individuals had been charged with crimes ranging from kidnapping and murder to conspiracy and human trafficking. Dr. Harrison Blackwood had received multiple life sentences without possibility of parole. Judge Patricia Morrison had been removed from the bench and was facing federal corruption charges. Sheriff Marcus Wellstone, though deceased, had been posthumously stripped of all honors and commendation. But more importantly, 47 victims had been identified across the program's 38-year operation. Families finally had answers. Survivors received comprehensive medical care and psychological support, and new federal legislation had been passed to prevent similar programs from ever operating again. The Meadowbrook Elementary families were seated in the front row of the hearing room. Kiera could see relief, grief, and closure in their faces as she presented the evidence that had finally given their children's deaths meaning and justice. Elena Campos, now serving as a consultant to the FBI's Victim Services Division, had testified earlier about her infiltration of the facility. Her courage had inspired new protocols for investigating organized criminal operations, and had led to the rescue of victims in similar facilities throughout the country. Santos, his Parkinson's symptoms managed with new medications, had become a leading advocate for medical ethics reform and was working with international organizations to prevent human experimentation abuses worldwide. But for Kiera, the most meaningful moment came when she presented the personal effects that had been recovered from the facility and the original crime scene. 23 small boxes, each containing the belongings of a child who had disappeared on a field trip in These items, she told the congressional panel, represent more than evidence. They represent the voices of children who could not speak for themselves, preserved by people who refused to let their stories be erased. Each family was able to reclaim something that had belonged to their lost child. A backpack, a toy, a piece of clothing that had survived 37 years as evidence of both terrible crimes and eventual justice. As the hearing concluded, Kiera was approached by Maria Chen, the widow of bus driver David Chen. "Mrs. Thorne," Maria said, her voice thick with emotion, "I visited David's grave yesterday to tell him that his story had finally been told. For 37 years I wondered if he had suffered, if he had been afraid. Now I know he died trying to protect those children. Mrs. Chen, your husband was a hero. The evidence showed he tried to resist the kidnappers and protect his passengers." Maria nodded, tears streaming down her face. He would be so proud to know that the truth finally came out. Outside the congressional building, Kiera found Elena and Dr. Santos waiting by a memorial fountain, dedicated to victims of unsolved crimes. "So what's next?" Elena asked. Kiera pulled out a thick folder from her briefcase. "The FBI has identified 37 other cases with similar patterns. Missing groups, unexplained disappearances, evidence that doesn't quite fit the official explanations." Elena smiled. "Sounds like we have work to do." As they walked away from the Capitol building, Kiera reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. 6 months ago she had been a quiet archivist preserving other people's investigation. Now she was leading her own cases, giving voice to victims who had been silenced, and ensuring that evidence could never again be buried by those who preferred convenient lies to difficult truth. The Meadowbrook Elementary field trip disappearance had been solved, but it had also revealed something larger, a systematic network of crimes that had operated in shadows for decades, relying on public indifference and institutional corruption to maintain their secrecy. But most importantly, it had shown that ordinary people, a teacher, a doctor, an archivist, could challenge extraordinary evil when they chose truth over safety, justice over convenience, and the voices of the dead over the threats of the living. As the sun set over Washington, Kiera Thorne knew that she had found her true calling, not just preserving evidence, but ensuring it could speak for those who no longer could. The children of Meadowbrook Elementary had waited 37 years for justice. They would never have to wait again.